welcome to the evening edition of COVID-19 Watch, Forward Stronger. I am your host, Stephen Duncan, and I am very pleased to be back and joined by you. Last week, we had the opportunity to delve into technology and agriculture, two broad, important topics. Tonight, we go even deeper and discuss education, which is, in many ways, the foundation on which our country is built. As structured as education tends to be, we know that it is required to be dynamic and progressive, since the world changes every day. New tools become available, new priorities emerge, and learning conditions change. COVID-19 has reminded us of these things and has forced us to address them without another second's delay. I am absolutely happy to have with me tonight some career educators to ventilate this topic. We have with us Ms. Deborah Domingo, CEO from the Ministry of Education. Welcome, Ms. Domingo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
We have Mr. Omar Longsworth, Principal from the Independence High School. Welcome, Mr. Longsworth. I think you're on mute there, Mr. And finally, we have Mrs. Jamie Usher, Principal from the Belize High School. Welcome, Mrs. Usher.
Hi, good night.
I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. And I want to remind the viewers that we want you to participate in this conversation. You may post your questions in the comments section on either the Colorblind's Facebook page or the Channel 7 News Facebook page. That said, let's get started. And maybe I could start with Mr. Longsworth. I hope he's been able to solve the...
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Got you loud and clear.
And good evening again. Sorry about that.
Mr. Longsworth, COVID came from nowhere and turned education and everything else besides that upside down. How easy or difficult was it for your school to respond and adapt to learning, to continue the learning process for the children?
Well, it was surely a challenge for us because this is something that I don't think anybody anticipated. At least surely I did not anticipate this in my lifetime.
Yeah.
In discussion with my parents, we would say not even them expected something like this in their lifetime.
Yeah.
So it was an abrupt kind of situation for all of us, I believe, across the education system. I must say that given the fact that we are located in the rural area where we serve 18 communities in Mid-South Belize,
Yeah.
And we're talking communities where there is, in some of them, there is no internet access.
Okay.
In others, we do have internet access. We have students who, because of their economic situations, they may have access to gadgets. There are others who do not have access to gadgets.
Yeah.
And so it has been an experience for all of us, myself as the administrator, the teachers that work along with the 900 plus students that we have at our institution. It has surely been an experience. But I keep saying that even in bad situations, there is some good if we try to find the silver lining.
Yeah.
And we, as an institution, we realized at that point in time that it was totally impossible for us to have focused only on technology because we would not have been able to reach many students. Probably 50% of the population we would not have been able to reach if we had focused only on technology. So we had to become innovative, and we had to find time, myself, working with the teachers and the other vice principals, where we had to actually go out to communities during that period of time to and work through our village chairpersons and distribute material to students, go back and collect them after a 2-week cycle and take a new set of documents to the students and get them in and package and send them out to teachers for them to mark and use as support grades for the students who in many cases needed that additional support. And so it was a trying time for us, but I believe that we have learned as educators that we need to be able to adapt to circumstances. I keep saying that we're living in a world where it's survival of the fittest, you know, and so we have to always remember it's important for us to step up to the plate whenever that becomes necessary. And I think that we are in that time where we have surely been able to do that. And I think there is much more. We have learned a lot, and there is much more where we are now anticipating that we'll be able to do once classes commence.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Maybe I could pose the same question to Mrs. Usher, except that I don't know the set of the conditions are the same. Mrs. Usher, listening to Mr. Longsworth's challenges out in rural Belize. You're here in the city, so maybe you can share your experience with us. How difficult or easy was it for you to make the adjustment?
Well, one of the things I want to start off saying is that Mr. Longsworth was kind enough to share some pictures with all the principals. And when he says he went out into the community and was right there in the thick of things, he absolutely means it. So I have to give him kudos on actually getting in the trenches with his staff and making sure that he was reaching who he could reach. So good job once again, Mr. Longsworth. For us at BHS, we've always had a portion of our curriculum online involving some kind of technology. So for the past 10 years, we have actually been bringing more and more elements of technology online. And so really, when the pandemic turned everything upside down, it was an opportunity for us to see how we can improve in certain areas and where we are already good in certain areas. Now, we don't have 900 students. We have 200. We're in the city. We have a smaller staff. And so our expectations were able to be set a lot higher in terms of our participation online. What we did do was change up the curriculum to a little bit more softer side in terms of teaching the students how to cope, because every student, every adult, every leader was under some level of stress. And so what we had to come up with was a way to keep the learning going without adding to the stress. And so what we did was implement a hackathon, which is a way to test the application of knowledge. So we had a good experience with that. And we also did something called an adulting challenge, where they would earn community service hours by just doing things around the house and working with their grandparents or learning a cooking skill. And we awarded them different things in the form of a bingo game. And so we were able to really pull something fun and something that eased everyone, but we had to keep them engaged. That was our goal. We had to keep the academic excellence on some level throughout the time. And in some ways, some people were grateful because it was a way to keep them engaged and not just be there wondering about what if. And so that was our COVID-19 experience. Excellent. And it continues.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie. Mrs. Domingo, who's that? Miss Domingo. Miss Domingo, there are two different experiences we heard just now, one from the rural Belize and one from Belize City. And I think the disparity or the divergence that we have heard clearly must in and of itself pose a challenge to the ministry. So how easy or challenging was it for the ministry to react to the closure of schools and transition to at-home learning?
Right. I think the response from Mr. Longsworth was a clear indication of where we were at the ministry. Um, we tried as best as possible to provide the framework for the education sector to respond to school closure.
Yes.
We recognize that leadership at the school level varied in terms of capacity. There are natural fears and anxiety associated with COVID-19. And in some instances, it paralyzes. Um, we were mindful that infrastructure varied, as Mr. Longsworth attested to.
Yes.
And so, what the ministry did was to mobilize our IT people, teachers from the education sector to assist us in developing materials to be posted on our website. We, knowing that we only have about 51% coverage in terms of internet
Wow.
in individual homes for secondary school students, decided that we were going to poll the high school principals to find out where they were in terms of, I think the terms that were used, and Mr. Longsworth can correct me, high tech, low tech, and no tech.
Okay.
Right? So we, as a ministry, we took it on ourselves with our partners, particularly teachers at the primary level and at the secondary, to develop materials that covered all of those modalities, the high
Got
tech,
you.
the low tech, and the no tech. And
Yes.
so we did produce the newsprint with the assistance of initially Guardian and then Amandala. We did the radio broadcast, and we are absolutely grateful to the people who gave it as community service, the airtime to the ministry, recognizing that in many instances that would have been the only means for
Yes.
children to stay tuned and to be engaged in learning.
Yes.
So
Do-
that was very, very helpful.
Are you
It wasn't all free. We had to pay for some airtime, but we did get some contributions of free airtime to do that. And of course, we uploaded the videos and the lessons on the ministry's website.
Yes.
In some instances, we know that schools were using what the ministry produced,
Yeah.
and that was only because we were mindful that we didn't always have schools that were ready to develop the distance learning opportunities, whether hard print or otherwise.
Oh,
And there is
okay.
an obligation to reach everybody.
But
So that was our short-term response.
But I sense you're alluding there, Mrs. Domingo, to attitude versus the capacity to be able to do the distance learning. You're saying that even in hard print, with the right attitude, they'd have been able to get out there and do it. Maybe do kind of what Mr. Longsworth did. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, some of that is there, but I also mentioned that there is a natural and very normal fear associated with COVID-19.
Gotcha.
There is just so many things that people don't know about
Yeah.
this disease.
Yes.
And we recall that schools were closed even before we had the first confirmed case
Yes.
in the country.
Yes.
And so when the cases were confirmed, people really started to get antsy. And we're
Yeah.
at a point right now
Yeah.
where, we have a few active cases in quarantine or in isolation. And there is still a lot of fear.
Okay. So how do you...
And we really can't blame folks for that.
Yes. How do you see, how effective do you think this was, what you described earlier? Do you believe that maybe a lot was lost from not having the in-person classes, or to what extent do you think that those approaches that you described earlier were effective?
Yeah,
Mr. Duncan, sorry, I just wanted to add to Ms. Domingo's point
Yes.
earlier. I think it's important in education in general, with non-pandemic circumstances, it's very hard for one activity
Yes.
to cover all students in all circumstances. So
Yes.
the ministry really had a gargantuan feat in terms of trying to set out a framework that would allow for everybody. So I think it's important to
Excellent point.
credit the fact that the adoption of whatever plans were in place really was because in general it's hard to come up with a one size fits all for education. And then if you throw in the stress of this pandemic, it really adds, and it's about more about the student attitude.
And when you add that additional aspect of not having been able to plan for it, not having been forewarned, not being able to project or predict that such a thing would have happened, yeah, that's a very good point you're making there, Mrs. Usher. I just want to remind the viewing audience, the viewing public, that we're discussing the future of education, and technology will feature prominently in this future. So let us talk about it, and we remind you to please join in the conversation by going to the website, the Facebook pages, and let us have your comments.
To the question you asked earlier, Steve,
Yes.
I think I recall Principal Longsworth mentioned getting out there with his staff and sharing materials in some very rural communities just about every 2 weeks. And at the start of school closure, that is what I think most schools planned for initially. 2 weeks. In some instances, some people were a little bit more progressive and they planned for an entire month. But the 2 weeks took us into the Easter break.
Yeah.
But the state of emergency continued after the Easter break. And so it was imperative on the ministry to reach out to managing authorities to encourage and support their administration and staff to, make plans for the students in their schools.
Yeah.
And we did that to some extent. But what we were quite mindful wasn't always there in many instances was the statistics to support, for instance, the number of children who tuned in, for example, on the radio
Yes.
show. That,
Yeah.
or how do you measure that?
Yes.
Through surveys, etc., perhaps. How many of the hard copies actually were used? That we have some statistics, but it is not, I think, realistic and reflective of what we had intended in some instances.
Yeah.
As we do have people even in Belize City who ended up accessing the hard copies.
Yeah.
And the intent was really to have those where you don't have the radio signals or the internet infrastructure, that kind of thing. So you ended up with people capitalizing on some modalities,
Okay.
right?
I must say that the radio programs reminded me of when I was much younger going to school, and I actually listened to some of them, so I hope the children enjoyed them. Could I ask Mr. Longsworth, could you share with me, based on your experience and what has happened, has that changed the school's philosophy in any way? Are you seeing that you're doing anything differently?
Well, definitely so. I must say, Mr. Duncan, that when I took over the institution in 2006, I had a whole plan of trying to include a lot of technology in what we were doing at Independence High School. And we invested heavily in our internet infrastructure, in projectors in the classrooms and that kind of thing from all the way back in 2010. So it was a whole plan that we were rolling out even without anticipating COVID-19.
Yes.
The difficulty we had, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that the students in their homes and in their communities do not have gadgets or do not have access to internet. So while we were doing a lot at the school to push technology in what we're teaching, when the students are at home, it was not as easily accessible. So definitely I am hoping that with time we could determine how students would be able to get access to some gadget, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a laptop,
Yeah.
for those that do not have. Teachers, we have done significant training in the month of June. The ministry, I must say, I have to commend the Ministry of Education because they made available a lot of training in technology that teachers were able to access over the period that they were at home. And many of my teachers were able to get into those training sessions.
Excellent.
We did some with Parklight. Even in July, early July, we did one. And so my teachers now know that we have to, as part of our planning process, that technology has to be a big part of what we're doing. And given that COVID, we are still living with this pandemic, it limits the number of students that we would be able to bring into the school at any given day, on any given day. So we have to be able to use some sort of blended modality where students would have some face-to-face sessions with teachers, and there are other days when the students would be at home and occupied doing schoolwork for the respective subject areas. So we are stepping up our game. The teachers have done significant training, and we are making preparations to do more in terms of being able to do justice in terms of continued quality service to the students that we're serving across the 18 communities that we're serving. So yes, we are making those adjustments.
Thank you. And Mrs. Usher, it is evident that BHS has had a high degree of success in this area, but as usual, you never become complacent and comfortable with where you are, and there's always room for growth and development. Where do you see BHS going? Do you see out of this pandemic anything that you would want to now do differently going forward?
Of course, well, one of the main things that we want to do is we have to keep pushing the boundary. You know, as a private school, that is our mandate. We have to keep pushing the continuous learning. We have to push the academic excellence because that's what our role is. So have parents have that choice when you come to a private school. We don't get funding from any other avenue than the parents. So, and the parents are always asking for more. So I always tell my children that I was lucky enough to have experienced TV shows like MacGyver.
Okay.
So for me, MacGyver was a great example in terms of making the most of what you have, no matter the situation. So you could watch any episode of MacGyver and walk away with that one lesson that you have to make the most of what you have, and you will figure your way out of any scenario. And that's something that's really brought out a lot of where we have improved on what we have currently, and also paved the way for things like exploring new tech. There is technology coming on board, you know, even faster now. And I think knowing that we were already at a good place, I think we're already trying to figure out how to adapt the new tech and to keep the learning going, because our role as a school is not to necessarily just teach one thing and then say you pass and then you graduate. The role of education is really about teaching them to cope with anything. Correct. So it's that constant skill building, because the world that our graduates, this class of 2020, is now having to plan for is something that we didn't even plan for. So we really have to work on putting together a list of skills, and expertise in just having them roll with situations rather than only be able to cope with certain scenarios. And that's how learning really has to change. If nothing else, the pandemic has taught us that no matter how prepared you think you are, there's always going to be that one scenario that happens that, you know, you just have to be prepared to keep going.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. CEO Dominguez, I think it's very hard to deny that there is a huge digital divide. We've heard it just in the short time we've been on this program tonight. And this stark contrast between the two. How has the ministry addressed that while attempting to keep learning ongoing during the closure of the classrooms, or has the ministry addressed it? Maybe you still need to do something to it.
It is a work in progress.
Yeah.
I think what was mentioned in the discourse earlier is the progress made by a number of our schools in terms of internet access. At the primary and secondary level, that's about 74% across the board. So there is progress in that area. Where we have a challenge is with having internet access at home, having devices at home.
Yes.
And so we're looking at ways to use the most commonly found device, the mobile phone, and how that can support education. We are looking at our existing programs with both the IDB and the CDB
All right.
in terms of repurposing some funds to provide access to the internet in the short term for students and devices for teachers. But the need is huge, and it will require a whole of government effort in terms of expanding internet access, ensuring that the infrastructure is available and that it is affordable for our students to log on. We are in discussion with the internet provider to assist the ministry as far as having online access be whitelisted or zero rated, so that students can access the materials on the ministry's website without data charges. We are also working on developing our online learning platform, while at the same time pushing, the availability of devices and the infrastructure. That has improved as well. And we continue to work on that. But it requires a significant investment. And I am very optimistic that there is the commitment from government to ensure that, access to the internet is promoted.
So
Mr. Duncan,
yes.
I think the door is open, or the way is paved with the investment made in DigiLearn. I think that platform, we explored it. We were a part of the pilot, but we couldn't afford it because of our function as a private school. But I really feel like the programs that allowed for certain schools to be involved in really do provide schools with some of the tools that we use. Like I said, the only reason we're not in it is because we can't afford it. But it really does give access to great apps like Teams and grading platforms that can help in communication, because throughout the technology process, it has to be a constant communication back and forth. So like Mr. Longsworth said, when he went to drop off materials in the rural areas, you have to go back to pick it up. And that's where the communication is key.
Yes. Actually, you anticipated the question I was going to ask Mrs. Domingo, Jamie. So thank you very much for that in terms of the BTL network and the fiber network that they've been rolling out and helping with DigiLearn, no? So thank you very much for that. So effectively, I think what we will do now, we are going to take our first commercial break. And when we come back, we are going to continue our conversation, and we will also be fielding some questions from the viewers. So I want to invite you, the viewing public, the viewing audience, to stay tuned. We are going to have a short commercial break, and we will be right back. Welcome back to COVID-19 Watch, Forward Stronger. I am your host, Stephen Duncan, and I am joined via video call by CEO Deborah Domingo from Education, Mr. Omar Longsworth, Principal of the Independence High School, and Mrs. Jamie Usher, Principal of the Belize High School. And I want to thank you all so much for your comments and the information you've been providing. Let me ask Miss Jamie. Your school seems to have found a formula to success. What would you say, is there a willingness, say, between the private schools like yours, along with the ministry, that could, maybe you guys could help in terms of enhancing the public schools? What do you think, if I were to put that to you?
Well, absolutely. I think there's always a constant sharing. The Principals Association, BHS is a member of it.
Okay.
Dr. Bab and I communicate regularly. So there's always a willingness for back and forth, and we do whatever opportunity in terms of teething pains that we went through as a smaller school. We are always a partner and should be reflected as that in terms of the fact that we are not costing the government any kind of funds or public funds that come into our school. So as a private school, we rely solely on the payment of our school fees by our parents.
Yes.
And so if anything, an extension of what we would provide for public schools is that we have a mandate to keep raising the bar to be able to offer a higher and higher curriculum. But definitely, without a doubt, we have always been willing to share what we have for those who would follow in steps that we have taken. I think it is an important part of developing our country. Our school motto is learners today, leaders tomorrow. That's a hard vision and philosophy to live if you're trying to operate in a bubble.
Yes.
So we are never wanting to be seen as separate from Belize and separate from the Ministry of Education, but we do have much higher requests from our own community. And so we have to keep working at it. We have to keep expanding our community, but it's not meant to be seen as a divide. It's just meant to be seen as our students are showing what Belizean students are capable of.
Absolutely.
So this year alone, the class of 2020 captured in merit scholarships, the students, not the school, the students captured merit scholarships close to $4.5 million. Wow. And so for the school to just be a little part in that success that goes solely to the student on their work, that's to show what Belizean students are competing with, because at the end of the day, they don't only operate in Belize and don't only study in Belize. We have them competitive across the globe.
Yes. Excellent.
Mr. Duncan, I hope you are not suggesting that because the institution is a private school, that it can offer help to all these public schools that are lagging behind, because I have to say there are excellent public schools.
Yes.
You have the principal of one such school on the show tonight.
Absolutely.
One of the things we need to recognize is that across this country and around the world, people are experiencing COVID-19 in different ways.
Yes.
It's COVID-19, but the socioeconomic divide within a nation and among nations is changing how we are experiencing COVID-19.
That is true.
And the same is true in our institutions.
Yes.
We have a lot of schools where principals and teachers work hard
Yes.
because they accept students who come in many times without all the things that they would need to be successful in school.
Yes.
In terms of meals, sometimes uniforms, sometimes books.
Yeah.
And, I am out of the classroom now, but, I still am aware that that's where we are. And the government of Belize, this administration, we have been trying to, to close the gaps to address the inequities.
Yes.
COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, will add to the gap, to the inequities that already exist. And as a government and as a people, together we must put our efforts together to support those who may need the extra help. And so we're grateful for the offer of assistance from Mrs. Usher and other people who are in the position to offer that assistance.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
we're all in this together. We're
Yes.
experiencing COVID-19 differently, and it is because inequities exist locally in our country and even among nations.
Well,
Absolutely.
and I think that that's a very good point in terms of um, how we go forward, because as a private school, accepting the fact that our parents are not financially as stable as before,
Yes.
that has really forced us to make sure, when we met with our parents the other night, we have to keep making sure that whatever our parents are paying, that they're getting, we call it bang for their buck, because it really is our responsibility,
Correct.
because our parents are funding us. It's
Yeah.
making sure that because we are a private school, that we are held at a higher bar. So as I said, it's an important thing to show that everybody's world has shifted,
Yes.
but it's really about how fast we get up and work with what we have. And so luckily, we have a great community that they are pledging that they will make do and they will meet us halfway in terms of our teacher salaries and our utility bills and everything, to make sure that our school can keep going. And where we are going to keep moving is that we go back to the very first mandate that we had 11 years ago or 10 years ago, that we have to keep making sure that we are equipping our students with what they need.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep doing it using whatever we have at the time, and we have to keep making sure that we are showing at every opportunity the wonderful Belizean students across this nation what they can accomplish.
Good. Omar, just to get you into this conversation here, especially on this point though, because even within the opportunities and all the good things that are happening there, it also highlights the divide in and of itself, because you have parents that would not necessarily be in a position to step up to the plate in the way that maybe within the private school, so that the constraint remains in your neck of the woods. But notwithstanding, are there different pockets where you're able to use a more blessed area, for want of a better description, to assist a less blessed area? How do you see your area as it relates to technology and trying to get that divide balanced out?
Yeah. Well, I think, in like the CEO mentioned, and I have to applaud Belize High School for their efforts in the use of technology and getting their students to move forward. But every school, in each school there, you have strengths. We operate at different levels given the varying ability levels and economic needs that our students come with at our institutions. And so when you look at a school operating in a rural area as opposed to maybe some other schools in other areas where, the economic situation is probably much better, it does have implications for what you can do as an institution. However, I have to say Independence High School is blessed. We exist in Independence. I mean, this is kind of the hub of the South.
Yes.
And we have one of the things that I think that works well for us is the fact that we have very good support from our business community in the area. And
Good.
many parents do make every effort to play their role and do their part to ensure that the school does what it can do to provide quality service to its students. And so we have been able to do quite a bit in this area in terms of the use of technology. I know you have not visited Independence High School, Mr. Duncan, but we are, in terms of facilities, we're one of the more admired school
Is that an
in this
invitation?
country in terms of facilities and what the services that we provide to our students, feeding programs,
Extremely nice campus.
yes, tuition waivers. And one of our strengths, our motto is to prepare students for life. And in addition to that, I say to my students, being competent is not enough. You need to keep striving for excellence.
Yes.
And as an administration, my staff, we try to implement programs that can ensure that we are actually fulfilling that mandate to ensure that our students are in fact being prepared for life. You come in and look at our tourism program. It's one of the best you have in the country.
Okay.
I think we're the only high school that have hotel rooms that we are going to inaugurate in September.
Excellent.
So we are doing a lot in the South, and I think all of that is intended to ensure that our students are functional. And many of them may have difficulty going on to higher learning. The reality in Belize is that I think we have around 25% transitioning to tertiary education. So many of these students are looking forward to develop a level of skill, a skill set that can make them employable, can make them prepare them to create their own employment and be able to lead meaningful lives. And I think at Independence High School, our tourism program, our technical program, inclusive of agriculture, we do cattle, chickens, pigs. Right now, we have about 70 odd pigs. We just have one of them. We gave birth to 14 piglets last night. So we do a lot of different things that other schools are not able to do in terms of ensuring students understand real life circumstances. And so we try to create a blend in the whole process, technology, and also for them to understand the value of a skill set that can work for them in the end. And that is what we continue to push as an institution, because we know that both of those things are absolutely important. So we expose them to the technology, but they must also understand the value of creating the skill set that they need to become functional citizens.
I must confess, it sounds also intriguing, Mr. Longsworth. CEO, do you think distance learning is the new normal?
It has to be. While there is always the push to have some face-to-face educational experience, because school is more than about the literacy and numeracy. It's also learning to build social skills, developing empathy, learn to live together. Since social distancing, and I'm told it's supposed to be physical distancing, has nowhere to go in a hurry, you will find few schools that are able to have all their students all 5 days per week on campus. So for the majority of our schools, while we may move to some level of reopening, that is going to be limited to maybe 2 days face-to-face instruction or 3 days face-to-face instruction and supported by distance learning. It is a blended modality that we will be experiencing. And if things look bleaky in terms of the COVID-19 and where it is in communities, from time to time, we will have to drop the face-to-face and stick solely to the distance learning modalities. So it really has nowhere to go.
Yes.
Even post-COVID-19, if I dare to dream about a post-COVID-19.
Such a thing.
Yes. The technology is out there. It is a norm for our Gen Z and our alpha generation to be using the technology. And so education will be further transformed. What COVID-19 will do to push us, and it is already doing that, to embrace technology even more quickly than we were anticipating. Um, we need to look at the role of the educator to shift that somewhat, and I think that is already happening. Um, and that we look at ways to build resilience in the education system, but also at the individual level, the individual person in the school and in the community.
But within
Mr.
that,
Duncan,
yes, go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to share because somehow I feel like we're getting tagged as the technology only school.
I was going to ask you that question.
I think it's important to share that our school is actually pushing for the face-to-face instruction. So we are doing everything we can to start back with face-to-face instruction,
Yes.
allowing for circumstances where families either don't feel safe or where they feel better working from home.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that really came out for me as an educator is the fact that humanities, the humanities courses and the humanities careers really shone out during this whole pandemic experience, because we learned that the technology made us be able to communicate, but we really needed to improve how we communicate online.
Okay.
And so that digital citizenship is something that all of us, students, parents, educators, we really needed to get a fast track version of how we communicate online, because online communication is a whole other level of communication. And so we really feel that part of our education transformation has hovered around the fact that we have to teach our students not only to think critically and creatively, but we had to develop personal qualities in them. So they have to learn how to be good people.
Yeah.
Because good people communicating online is a wonderful addition. But when you have people who just don't have a care or aren't good digital citizens, that's when communication really falls apart quickly. And we've seen tastes of that on social media, and we've seen it in media interviews around the world, that it shows that we have to grow as people. And so we're not going to miss an opportunity to interact with our students for how many days we can. But we really feel that it's an important part of developing the person that will be the leader. And so we have to prepare for things. I mean, this could have been a Category 5 hurricane that knocked out power, and then where would we be technology-wise?
But Jamie, but Jamie, isn't the online communication a reflection of how we communicate and treat each other?
Yeah,
period?
but it explodes online, and
Yeah.
I think that's where we don't really check each other face to face as
Yeah.
much as you get another personality online. And so I absolutely agree with you that there's definitely two different versions to somebody. There's their online personality and their face to face.
I see.
But in terms of the amount of people, adults who had to have Zoom meetings, they got tired easily. They get frustrated. They get bored. They had a whole lot of memes around staff meetings and different things that had to happen online. And so it really gave us insight to the fact that if we were asking our students to sit down in a class with a teacher, listening, pretending to be engaged, then that really wasn't helping the situation, because if they're bored, they won't be learning.
Yeah.
So we have to come up with ways to engage them. And that's where I feel like that's where the process is constantly moving, because it's just like, it's planning for your family, but you have, in the case of Mr. Omar, you have 700 or 900 family members to plan for.
Gotcha.
So it has to be a process where we have lessons along the way, but we appreciate that there's learning happening all the time, because we have to keep moving with our students.
All right, just quickly, Jamie. We spoke, Mr. Omar spoke earlier about the agricultural aspect of education and the vocational to a certain extent. Is that being done at BHS?
No. We don't have any of the extracurriculars like that. I went to a school. I'm a product of Belmopan Comprehensive School, and so we had all of those food and nutrition and agriculture and electrical. But when we visited Mr. Omar's campus, that's a fantastic setup in terms of the avenues that students can go, because I think that's an important part of how we can move forward from COVID-19 as Belize, because we need to try and tailor what our country needs with the amount of students that want to work or get involved in working after graduation.
Yes.
So I think part of where there is a big gap in terms of when they graduate, they want a job. So I think we have to be able to find out what the public sector needs, what do they want, and then find as a way for them to have a net so that when you graduate, you actually have something to fall into you're not continuing your education.
Good. When we're running out of time, so I'm going to leave you with one question, and then I'll take a commercial break, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to comment on it. And basically that is, how prepared are we for the reopening of school on August 10th? So you can think about it during this next commercial break, and I will invite the viewing audience to stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to COVID-19 Watch, Forward Stronger. I am your host, Stephen Duncan, and I'm going to ask our guests to respond to the question I left them with earlier. We can take it in turn. I know maybe we can start with CEO.
All right, so we are doing our assessment of where schools are. In fact, schools are submitting their plans. I know that in many instances, high schools had to get ready for the administration of the CSEC exams. We had the recent state of, public emergency declared for San Felipe and Blue Creek. And that has triggered quite a bit of alarm. And it is our observation that as we approach the open date for schools, and as we approach even the open date for the airport, that there are growing apprehensions.
Yes.
Teachers and parents and so on, and we're quite mindful of that. The guidelines that have been provided are provided with the best interests of students and the teachers in mind.
Okay.
But we're looking at ways we can provide assistance to schools that may be lagging behind. As I said earlier on the show, there are a lot of concerns.
Yes, understood.
And we want to be true to those and to be as responsive as possible.
Excellent. All right.
There are good reasons to open school, but in some areas it may be a good reason to slow the process down.
Got you.
And to provide the help and intervention where it is necessary.
All right. 10 seconds, Jamie.
Well, I'm just looking forward to opening on August 10th. I think schools provide a certain stabilities to the households.
Yes.
And I am anxious to see my students again and to hopefully be a part of paving our way through this, because this is not going to go away.
Yes.
So we're just having to adapt.
Okay. Omar, 10 seconds.
Yeah, well, we are pushing for August 10th as well. We are putting in all the necessary, making the arrangements we need to make. We're going at it, scheduling, looking at classrooms, wash units, and all of these things. We are going and getting ourselves prepared right now. So we are going there, and it's about working with and through people, you know. So am trying to convince my teachers that we need to keep moving forward and we need to come with an open mind and see what we can do. At the end of the day, it's about serving people, serving humanity, working with students. So let's go at it. Let's see what we can do. And if that time comes, we have to close, we're better prepared for whatever comes. So
Good.
We are ready to give it a try on August 10th.
Thank you very much. Well, that is it for our question and answer time for today. To the viewers who contributed, thank you very much. And for our panelists, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being with us and for sharing with us tonight. I just want to remind the viewing public, you're encouraged to return for more COVID-19 Watch right here on Channel 7 or on Facebook. Join us Thursday at 8 p.m. when we look at the future of tourism in Belize. Do enjoy the rest of your night and the remainder of your week. Take care.